BMW F850GS and F750GS review. BMW introduced the world to the F850GS in 2007. European countries received a production version in 2008, and by the time it reached American shores in 2009 it was one of the most anticipated bikes of the year. And then time marched on. For those of you too young to remember, the adventure class looked wildly different 10 years ago. In 2009, BMW was relatively unchallenged in the adventure motorcycle segment. KTM had just released the 990 Adventure and Suzuki had the V-Strom line, but it could be argued that BMW owned that market niche. Over the past 8 years, we've seen huge growth in the adventure segment, and the relatively unchanged F850GS has grown long in the tooth. BMW was apparently aware of this as well, because a lot of the changes announced for the new 2018 F850GS and F750GS motorcycles address the outgoing bike's shortcomings. The delineation between the two bikes remains similar. If you are primarily sticking to the asphalt while tackling the occasional fire road, the F750GS offers cast wheels and less suspension travel for a more street-oriented experience. The F850GS will offer spoked wheels and a long travel suspension for tackling the obstacles you might run into when riding off-road. Both bikes will have new carrying style offerings for 2018, but the off-road oriented rally option that we originally saw introduced in the R1200GS is reserved for the F850GS. The new F850GS and F750GS will share the same engine, an 853cc parallel twin with dual counterbalance shafts and a 270/450 degree firing interval, which BMW claims will help to smooth out the experience for the rider. From my experience with the old F850GS, the engine characteristics reminded me more of a large dirt bike than a smooth road-going machine, so it'll be interesting to see the actual result of these changes. Power output varies between the two new models, with the F750GS laying claim to 77 horsepower at 7,500 RPM, while the new F850GS boasts 95 horsepower at 8,250 RPM. For those of you doing the math, that's a 10.5% increase in power over the previous F850GS, which claimed 85 horsepower at 7,500 RPM. Torque has increased by 10% as well, and now peaks at 68 foot-pounds on the F850GS and 61 foot-pounds on the F750GS. Let's pause for a second here to consider where all this power is climaxing. The new F850GS isn't making maximum horsepower until 750 RPM higher in the engine's red range, and peak torque is pushed to 6,250 RPM. 500 RPM higher than the F850GS. So while BMW has increased power on these new models, they appear to be a bit higher strung than previous versions. I would love to see the dyno chart to get a better view of the picture BMW is painting with this new engine. From what I can discern from the press release, it looks like the electronics on these models are more of a refinement than a revolution. Rain and road modes remain standard on both bikes, with pro riding modes remaining an option. On the 850GS you now get an additional 3 options: Dynamic, Enduro, and Enduro Pro. Enduro Pro is not available on the F750GS. Aside from the dynamic setting Think Sport, this naming convention is unchanged over the previous bike. BMW has made no mention as to whether the modes themselves will differ in their response over the previous version. ABS remains standard and is now joined by BMW's Automatic Stability Control ASC, which was previously an option on the outgoing F850GS. The new 850 gets better offerings for optional safety equipment in the way of BMW's Dynamic Traction Control DTC and ABS Pro. Both DTC and ABS Pro up the ante over their base counterparts by factoring lean angle into the equation. BMW refers to the new frame as a steel bridge frame in monocoque construction. In normal speak, it looks to be a twin spar pressed steel frame which utilizes the engine as a stress member. The subframe looks to be a separate unit constructed of tubular steel. With changes to the frame come changes in steering geometry, and BMW is promising a more precise ride. The biggest change that I can see that will affect handling is the new placement of the fuel tank. Gone is the under-seat tank design, which is now replaced with a traditional fuel tank in between the steering head stem and the seat. BMW claims an improved center of gravity over the previous generation of F-bikes. I am left wanting more information about the changes made to the suspension. BMW mentions a new upside-down telescopic fork plus double-sided aluminum swinging arm with central spring strut for more sensitive response characteristics in the highlights section of the press release, but doesn't go into any further detail. It looks like electronic suspension adjustment. The S8 is still available at the rear, but what I really want to know is changes have been made to address the shortcomings of the previous front end. BMW is no longer alone in the adventure segment. There is now stiff competition from nearly every manufacturer, with bikes that run the gamut from street-going touring bikes to competitive off-road machines. The F850GS has always done a good job of splitting that line quite well. We are now left with the question as to whether all of these changes will continue that tradition or push this bike further into a different direction. I look forward to getting an opportunity to ride one to find out.